to show you a couple of tips and tricks about working with fresh herbs. And really the same thing can be said for greens, but I'll show you that separately. So a lot of people will avoid getting fresh herbs. I have some fresh cilantro here because if you leave it in that wet plastic bag that you'll often get it at the grocery store in, it will go slimy, brown very quickly, maybe even in a day or so. But if you take care of it properly, wash it when you get it home and store it the way that I'll show you, you can really get a good week or two out of it easily in the fridge. So I hope that will help you to move toward using more fresh herbs, because it's a great way to add a lot of flavor without, having to add more salt, sodium, other things that people might be trying to cut out of their diet. And really amping up flavor using some herbs and spices is a great way to also bring interest and variety to the different dishes that you're making. So with the cilantro here, I'm going to first grab a salad spinner. I don't use too much specialty equipment in the kitchen, but I will strongly recommend that you have a salad spinner. It's going to just make it much more likely that you're going to get more fresh vegetables, especially greens, things that you would otherwise need to clean in a way that you might avoid doing if you didn't have a quick, easy, efficient way to do so. So with this one, they all operate similarly in that they use centrifugal force to get the water off of vegetables when you spin it. I'll show you how that works in a minute. I like to get one that actually has a bowl that you can fill up with water, and I'll show you that as well, and then a separate strainer or colander part. So I've taken off the band off the cilantro, and it hasn't been washed yet. I'm putting it in here. I do try and put it in like it came in a bunch, and I'll show you in a few minutes that that's helpful when you're chopping. And now I'm going to step away, fill this up with some water, and I'll show you the next step. So now I've filled this with enough to submerge the cilantro in nice cold water. The colder the better. If the water doesn't come out of your faucet very cold, or your herbs look like they're just about past their prime, they're not going to be useful. As long as they're not slimy and brown, they're just very wilted, you can actually revive them. You can toss some ice in here and let it sit for 15 minutes to an hour. There's really no end time, just as long as it takes to perk them up a bit so they absorb some of that water and crisp back up. And at that point, once you feel like if you've revived some slightly sad herbs or cilantro, you can go with the next step. Mine was pretty fresh, so I don't need to do that. But I'll just swish it around, kind of move it around, and you can look at the water, and if this is, straight from the farm, maybe from the farmer's market, you'll usually see quite a lot of dirt and sediment in there. And you have to keep doing this process that I'll show you over and over until you don't see a lot of dirt in there. If you've ever had dirt in your herbs where you take a bite and you just get this grittiness in your teeth, it's very unpleasant. So it's worth, every extra minute that you spend to clean this properly so that you don't have that happen to you. Also, you can tell this is organic. There's a few little aphids and things in there. So you want to make sure you just get all of that, that extra protein out of there as well. So I'm going to drain this and be back. So I filled it back up with water and I swish it around again. This time it looks really clean. Again, really just depends on how clean or not this starts out as to how many times you need to do this. When I'm over at the sink draining this, let me just show you what I would do. So you can actually lift out the strainer part, and I would encourage you to lift this out, not just dump it. The reason you do that is that any remaining dirt, sediment, bugs, anything like that will stay in the water for the most part, and then you can dump the water out, and then you're not just constantly, pouring the dirt back over the greens or herbs, and you'll clean it faster. So we'll do that. So let me go ahead and dump out this water, and I'll be back to show you the next step. Before I move to the next step, let me explain how you could do this same thing without a salad spinner, because you might be watching this thinking, okay, but what do I do today? Or I just don't have room in my cupboard or for this, or money to buy another device. So as long as your sink is really clean, you can just fill your kitchen sink up with cold water, add ice if you need to, and just put your greens in there. If you have a lot, like let's say you get a few different kinds of herbs, a couple heads of lettuce, lots of different things that you need to wash and clean at the farmer's market, for example, then it actually might be much more efficient to just fill up your sink and do that way, pulling all of the veggies and fresh greens and herbs out in between each change in water. And then what you can do is you can roll your greens or herbs up in a dry towel to dry it off instead of using the centrifugal force that I will use with this. You might need to change the towel a couple of times. But the goal is really to get the moisture off. You want just a little bit so it doesn't, get all wilted again. But if you have a lot of excess moisture clinging to the greens, then that's what's going to speed up spoiling. So I'll put the lid on here. This one just has a little release. And this one, I push this down and it will cause it to spin. There's some, stop it so you can hear me. So there's some older ones where it's more like a pull lawnmower, so it's a string you pull and that's what makes it spin. There's lots of different ways it creates the spinning force, but as long as it's spinning, it will basically force the water out through the holes of the strainer part into the bowl. You just do that long enough that most of the water comes out. This is a really great thing to do with kids in the kitchen. I mean, they can't get enough of using the salad spinner, I promise you. And even though it had, been sitting, like let's say you rinse this in a colander and thought, oh, it's, it's pretty dry. You can see with the extra centrifugal force, you actually have all this extra water sloshing around in there, even in something that had already drained. So you're getting a lot of extra water off with this type of device. And if you have big crevices in your greens, like kale, something like that, you might need to spin it and dump it a few times to get most of that extra water off. Okay, so what are we going to do with it at this point? There's a few different things you can do. I'm just going to show you using some things that most people would have access to. If you have a nice Lexan or an Algene container, a room in your fridge where you can put a reusable container, you could use that instead of the baggie that I'm going to use, but I'm just going to use just a plain sealing baggie. And then if you have a lint-free kitchen towel, you can use that so you're not using anything that you have to throw away. But I'm just going to use a paper towel here. And what I'll do is I'm going to take my cilantro out, still keeping it kind of in the shape that it came in the bunch, because that does make it easier for chopping if you need to chop a lot of herbs. And then I'm just going to lay it out kind of, it doesn't have to be a perfectly single layer, but kind of have all the stems at this end, the green, the greens toward this end, so that I can grab it up into a bunch again. But I'm just going to kind of roll it up loosely. You don't want to pack it down in the towel. And again, that's going to take up some of that extra moisture as well. But what's nice is it pulls the moisture into the towel, but then the towel stays moist in there, so it prevents it from drying out. So it's not directly, clinging to the greens, but it's in the same container, which helps keep it crisp. Just put it in the baggie, press out some of the extra air, and just turn this around, seal it up. And if you store it like this in your fridge, I usually get about 2 weeks out of cilantro this way, but certainly even if it starts out kind of sad, it will last at least a week. Many, many more days than it would last if you just tossed it in your fridge in that thin plastic bag that it would come in from the grocery store. So I hope this helps you get a lot more herbs into your life.